scent of mildew and forgotten dreams hit me the moment I stepped out of my sedan. This weathered apartment complex had stood in downtown Detroit for nearly 8 decades, its red brick facade crumbling like the lives contained within. I locked my gray Honda in its usual spot, marked by years of oil stains on the cracked pavement. Another 15th of the month had arrived, which meant another envelope, another climb, another payment on a debt that felt heavier with each passing year. My name is Angela. I'm 34, a widow, a mother, and apparently an eternal debtor. The purse on my shoulder carried $175 in cash, carefully counted and placed in a white envelope. For most people, that's dinner out and a movie. For me, it represented a week of overtime shifts at the hospital where I worked as a technician, money that could have bought my daughter new shoes or paid for her art supplies. Instead, it would disappear behind a bolted door on the 6th floor, swallowed by the same silence that had consumed my hope 5 years ago. The stairwell loomed before me like a concrete throat. 6 floors, no elevator. My sneakers squeaked against tiles that hadn't been properly cleaned since the building opened. Each landing brought its own symphony of urban life. Ground floor, someone's television blared a game show at maximum volume. 2nd floor, the acrid smell of overcooked cabbage seeped from under a door. 3rd floor, a baby's cry pierced through thin walls. 4th floor, 2 men argued in rapid Spanish about a borrowed car. 5th floor, the sounds faded into an eerie quiet, and the 6th floor, where Thomas's parents lived, existed in a realm of absolute stillness that made my skin prickle every single time. I paused at the 6th floor landing, pressing my palm against the cool concrete wall to steady myself. My lungs burned, not just from the climb, but from the familiar dread that crawled up my spine whenever I approached apartment 608. The door was painted a faded green, the numbers hanging slightly crooked. Behind that door lived Evelyn and Harold, my late husband's parents, 2 people who had transformed from family into creditors, from comfort into cold transaction. 5 years ago, when Thomas announced he was taking a contract job on the oil rigs in Alaska, his parents withdrew their entire retirement account, $15,000, to help him get started. They paid for his certifications, his travel, his equipment. The day we received word that Thomas had died in a rig accident, his mother stood in my tiny living room and pointed her trembling finger at me. "He left because you weren't enough," she'd said, her voice cracking with grief and rage. "He went to that frozen wasteland to build a better life, and now he's gone, and we have nothing. That $15,000 is gone with him, and you, as his wife, will repay every penny." I had been too broken to argue, too consumed by my own grief to fight back. Little Sophia was only 3 years old, bewildered by her father's absence, crying for Daddy every night. I agreed to the payments, $175 every month for 7 years, because I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought it would keep Sophia connected to her grandparents. I thought it would honor Thomas's memory. Mostly, I thought the pain would be easier to bear if I just accepted it and moved forward. I knocked 3 times, sharp raps that echoed in the silent hallway. Silence answered. I knew they were home. They were always home. Evelyn complained of dizzy spells and migraines. Harold had a bad hip and rarely left his recliner. They existed like ghosts in that apartment, curtains perpetually drawn, television always off, as if they were waiting for something or hiding from something. I knocked again, harder this time. "Evelyn, Harold, it's Angela. I have this month's payment." A full minute crawled by before I heard the shuffle of slippers on carpet. The deadbolt slid back with a metallic scrape. The door cracked open, chain still attached, and Evelyn's face appeared in the narrow gap. She looked older than her 63 years, her face deeply lined, her eyes sunken and perpetually suspicious. She never smiled anymore, not since Thomas died. "You're late," she said flatly, though I was right on time, as I always was. "No, it's the 15th, same as always," I replied, keeping my voice gentle. "I brought the money for this month. Give it here. No pleasantries, no how are you, no asking about her granddaughter." I pulled the envelope from my purse and held it out through the small opening. Evelyn's bony hand shot out and snatched it, the motion practiced and swift. She didn't count it, didn't acknowledge it beyond stuffing it immediately into the pocket of her housecoat. "How's Sophia doing?" she asked, but her eyes were looking past me, scanning the empty hallway as if checking for witnesses. "She's wonderful. She made the honor roll again. She's been asking about you both. I could bring her by this weekend if you'd like. We haven't visited in months, and I know she misses you." Evelyn's expression soured immediately. "No, not this weekend." Harold's hip is acting up, and I can't handle a child running around. Too much noise, too much stress. We'll let you know when we're feeling up to it." It was the same excuse she'd given for the past 2 years. In 5 years, Sophia had been inside that apartment perhaps 4 times, and each visit had lasted less than 20 minutes before we were ushered out with some vague complaint about headaches or fatigue. "Maybe I could come in for just a moment?" I tried, desperate for any connection beyond these monthly transactions. "I'd love to see how you're both doing." "The apartment's a mess. Harold isn't dressed." "Just leave the money and go, Angela. You're letting cold air into the hallway." With that, she pushed the door shut, and the deadbolt slammed home with finality. I stood there, staring at the closed door, feeling the familiar sting of rejection. I pressed my ear against the wood, hoping to hear Harold's voice, maybe the murmur of a television, any sign of normal life. Nothing. The apartment was silent as a tomb. An involuntary shiver ran through me. I pulled my jacket tighter and turned toward the stairs. "Thomas," I whispered to the empty hallway, "I'm almost done paying what you owed them. Why do they still treat Sophia and me like strangers?" As I descended, I didn't notice the thin gap in the apartment's curtain or the eye watching me from within, an eye that belonged to someone younger and sharper than an elderly man with a bad hip should possess. The courtyard behind the building was a different world. Late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of ancient oak trees, dappling the cracked basketball court with golden light. Kids shouted and played, their voices full of life and energy. A group of women sat on benches, shelling peas and sharing neighborhood gossip. I was heading toward my car, keys already in hand, when someone grabbed my wrist. "Angela, sweetheart, is that you?" I turned to find Mrs. Patterson, the building's unofficial matriarch, a 70-year-old woman who had lived here for 40 years and knew everyone's business. She sat on a weathered bench, fanning herself with a Chinese takeout menu, her sharp eyes fixed on me. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Patterson. Yes, just finishing up here." She didn't release my wrist. Instead, she pulled me down to sit beside her and glanced around as if making sure no one was listening. Then she leaned close, her voice dropping to a whisper that sent ice through my veins. "You went up to give them money again, didn't you? Child, when are you going to stop letting those people take advantage of you?" I frowned, confused. Mrs. Patterson was a gossip, but she wasn't cruel. "It's not like that. I owe them. Thomas borrowed that money, and now that he's gone, it's my responsibility." Her grip on my wrist tightened, and her eyes widened with something between pity and fear. "Listen to me carefully, Angela. The dead don't always stay dead, if you know what I mean." My heart skipped. "What are you talking about?" "Thomas died 5 years ago. We have the death certificate. We received his ashes." She waved her hand dismissively. "I'm not talking about ghosts. I'm talking about flesh and blood. Haven't you noticed that apartment is quiet as a church during the day, but late at night, around 1 or 2 in the morning, there's noise? Heavy footsteps, running water, sounds that don't match 2 old people barely able to walk." I felt my pulse quicken. "You must be mistaken. I'm old, but I'm not senile," she snapped. 3 weeks ago, I couldn't sleep. I went out on my balcony to get some air, and I saw a man going up to the 6th floor. The way he moved, the way he favored his left side, reminded me exactly of how Thomas used to walk after he hurt his knee that summer. My mouth went dry. Thomas had torn ligaments in his left knee years ago, and ever since he'd walked with a slight hitch in his step, his left shoulder dipping just a fraction when he put weight on that leg. "That's impossible," I breathed, but my voice shook. "Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But here's the strange part. Every time you come to deliver money, within a day or 2, that shadow shows up, like clockwork. And I'm not the only one who's noticed. Mrs. Chen on the 5th floor says she hears voices sometimes, a man's voice, coming from up there late at night." I wanted to dismiss it as paranoid rambling, but Mrs. Patterson's face was dead serious. "If you don't believe me, check for yourself. The building management just installed security cameras on the stairwells because of break-ins. The one between the 5th and 6th floors should show you everything you need to see. My nephew works for the security company. I can probably get you access if you ask nicely." She released my wrist and went back to fanning herself as if she'd just commented on the weather. I stood on shaking legs and walked to my car, my mind spinning. The dead don't always stay dead. Walks like Thomas. Shows up after I bring money. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. What if Thomas was alive? What if everything, the grief, the debt, the lonely nights, the struggles, had all been based on a lie? But why? Why would he fake his death? Why would he let his daughter grow up thinking she was fatherless? The questions multiplied faster than I could process them, buzzing in my skull like angry wasps. By the time I picked up Sophia from school, I had made a decision. I needed to see that security footage. I needed to know the truth, whatever it was, no matter how much it might destroy me. That night, after Sophia was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone in hand. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. My cousin David, a tech-savvy college student who had helped me recover lost files before. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the call button. Once I made this call, there was no going back. I would be committing to uncovering whatever truth lay hidden on those security recordings. I pressed call. "Angela, it's like midnight. What's wrong?" David's sleepy voice answered. "I'm sorry to call so late, but I need help with something sensitive. You know people who work with security systems, right?" There was a pause, then rustling as David apparently sat up. "Yeah, I have a friend who does installations. Why? I need access to security footage from my in-laws' building. The cameras on the stairwell between the 5th and 6th floors, specifically the last 3 months of recordings." Angela, that's kind of illegal without a warrant or permission. What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "I think Thomas might be alive." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, David spoke, his voice careful. "Your husband who died 5 years ago. That Thomas, yes, okay. Give me until tomorrow evening. I'll see what I can do. But Angela, if this is true, if he really is alive, you need to be prepared for what that means." "I know," I whispered, though I didn't know. Not really. "How do you prepare for your dead husband to resurrect himself?" The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every hour at work felt like 3. I made mistakes, forgot orders, mixed up patient files. My supervisor pulled me aside and asked if everything was all right at home. I lied and said I was just tired. How could I explain that I was waiting to find out if my entire life for the past 5 years had been built on fraud? At 6 p.m., I met David at a small coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment. He arrived carrying his laptop bag, his expression grave. We found a corner booth, and he set up his computer without a word, angling the screen so only we could see it. "I got the files," he said quietly. "I'm going to show you, but Angela, seriously, brace yourself." He opened a video player. The footage was grainy, black and white, time-stamped in the corner. The camera angle showed the landing between the 5th and 6th floors, capturing the stairs leading up and the beginning of the 6th-floor hallway. The timestamp read 1:47 a.m., dated 2 weeks ago. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then a figure appeared at the bottom of the frame, climbing the stairs. The person wore a dark hoodie pulled low, a baseball cap underneath, and a face mask. But it was the walk that made my breath catch in my throat. Right foot, then the left dragging just slightly behind, the left shoulder dipping with each step. That distinctive hitch, the exact movement pattern I had watched for 7 years of marriage. "Oh my God," I whispered. The figure reached the 6th-floor landing and walked directly to a door off camera. What I knew must be apartment 608. Without hesitation, the person reached into a pocket, pulled out keys, selected one, and unlocked the door. The ease of the motion, the familiarity, it was someone who belonged there. "There's more," David said grimly, advancing the footage. "Here's the month before." Same time, 1:43 a.m., same figure, same walk, same confident entry into the apartment. And the month before that, again, same pattern. Always within 48 hours of the 15th of the month, within 2 days of when I delivered money. David pulled up a 4th video, this one from 3 months ago. In this footage, the figure's mask had slipped slightly, and though the image was blurry, I could see the line of a jaw, the shape of a nose. Features I'd kissed, features I'd memorized, features I'd mourned. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling out of the booth. "It's him. It's really him. Thomas is alive." David reached across and squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry, Angela. I can copy all of this to a drive for you. What are you going to do?" What was I going to do? My husband, the father of my child, had been alive this entire time while I scraped together money to pay his parents a debt that was apparently funding his secret life. The betrayal cut deeper than his death ever had. When he died, or when I thought he died, at least I could tell myself he hadn't chosen to leave us. But this was choice. This was deliberate. This was cruelty. "Copy everything," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. Every video you can access. I need proof of all of it. While David worked, I sat back and let my mind race through the past 5 years. The funeral, where Evelyn had wailed and Harold had stood stone-faced. The modest urn they'd insisted on, claiming the crematorium in Alaska had strict policies. The way they'd immediately brought up the debt even before the memorial service was over. The way Evelyn always took the money so quickly, never counting it, as if she'd been expecting it. The way they never invited Sophia over, never showed any interest in maintaining a relationship with their granddaughter. It all made horrible, perfect sense now. They weren't grieving grandparents scraping by on fixed income. They were accomplices in fraud, helping their son steal from his own family. But why? That was the question burning in my mind. Why would Thomas do this? Why fake his death? Why hide? What was he running from that was so terrible he'd rather let his daughter think she was fatherless? Here, David said, sliding a USB drive across the table. Everything I could get. Angela, you should probably take this to the police. Not yet, I said, closing my fingers around the drive. Not until I know why. Not until I understand what he's done and what he's hiding. David looked worried but nodded. Be careful. If he's desperate enough to fake his own death, there's no telling what else he might do. I drove home in a daze, the USB drive burning in my pocket like a live coal. At home, I checked on Sophia, sleeping peacefully in her bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow, so much like her father's. My heart ached looking at her. How do you tell your child that the father she mourned never actually died, that he simply chose to abandon her? I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I had all the answers. In my bedroom, I opened my laptop and plugged in the drive. I watched the videos again and again and again, until the sun started to rise and Sophia's alarm went off. I watched the way Thomas moved, the way he glanced around before entering, the calculated caution of every gesture. This wasn't a man who'd faked his death on impulse. This was planned, deliberate, methodical. I needed more information. I needed to understand what Thomas had been involved in, what he was running from, where he was staying. The apartment visits were clearly just pickups, quick stops to collect money. He had to be living somewhere else, somewhere close enough to make the trips but far enough to stay hidden. Over the next week, I became someone I didn't recognize. I called in sick to work and spent my days investigating, researching, questioning. I started with Thomas's old friends, calling them under the pretense of finally going through his belongings and finding old photos. Did they remember anything unusual before he left for Alaska? Had he mentioned any problems, any debts, any trouble? Most conversations led nowhere, just awkward condolences and vague memories. But then I talked to Marcus, Thomas's best friend from high school, the one who'd given a tearful speech at the memorial. You know, Marcus said, after we'd talked for a while, I always thought it was weird how he left. Thomas called me the week before he supposedly went to Alaska. He sounded off, nervous. He asked me if I knew anyone who could help someone disappear, like witness protection type stuff. I thought he was joking, but now, I don't know. Why are you really calling, Angela? My pulse raced. Did he say why he needed to disappear? He mentioned owing money to the wrong people, gambling debts, I think. Said he'd gotten in over his head in some underground poker games, and the guy running them wasn't the forgiving type. I told him to go to the police, but he laughed and said the police were the last people who could help him. Gambling debts. That made a sick kind of sense. Thomas had always liked poker, always thought he was better at reading people than he actually was. In the months before Alaska, he'd been anxious, irritable, secretive about money. I'd attributed it to stress about the job opportunity, but what if it had been something else entirely? Marcus, do you remember the name of anyone he was playing with? Anything that might help me understand? There was a guy called Snake, ran games out of a pool hall on the east side. Real piece of work. Look, Angela, if Thomas owed money to someone like that, faking his death might have actually been smart. These aren't people who accept payment plans. After I hung up, I sat with this new information, turning it over in my mind. Thomas had gotten into gambling debt with dangerous people. He'd faked his death to escape them. But that didn't explain why he was still hiding 5 years later, or why he was stealing money from me through his parents. Unless the debt was bigger than I imagined. Unless he was still paying it off. Unless he needed a steady, untraceable income source. And what better source than a grieving widow who wouldn't question paying a debt to her dead husband's elderly parents? The cruelty of it took my breath away. He'd turned my love for him, my sense of obligation, my respect for his parents, into a machine that funded his survival while he stayed hidden from his mistakes. And his parents, they'd helped him do it, watching me struggle month after month, watching their granddaughter grow up without a father, all while knowing the truth. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break things. But instead, I opened my laptop and began planning. If Thomas thought he could hide forever, he was wrong. If he thought I would keep feeding his deception, he was wrong. I had been a grieving widow for 5 years, but I was done grieving. Now I was going to be something else entirely. I was going to be the woman who brought him down. The following Tuesday arrived with the weight of accumulated dread. It was the 15th again, payment day, but this time I had no intention of simply handing over money and walking away. This time, I was going to start dismantling the lies, brick by brick. I withdrew the usual $175 from the ATM, placed it in an envelope, and added something extra, a tiny audio recording device I'd purchased from an electronics store. David had shown me how to activate it with a simple press, how it could record for hours on a single charge. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a cardigan with deep pockets. In one pocket, the envelope with money and the recorder. In the other, my phone set to record video. I wasn't sure what I'd capture, but I needed evidence beyond the security footage. I needed voices, admissions. Something concrete that would prove not just that Thomas was alive, but that this whole arrangement was a deliberate fraud. The climb to the 6th floor felt different this time. Each step was purposeful, calculated. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an investigator. When I reached the landing, I paused and glanced up at the security camera, giving it a small nod as if to say, I know you're there now. I know what you've seen. I knocked on the door of 608, the same 3 sharp raps, the same agonizing wait, the same shuffle of slippers. But when Evelyn's face appeared in the crack of the doorway, I noticed something I'd missed before. She looked tired, but not frail old tired. She looked exhausted in the way someone keeping a difficult secret looks exhausted, the weariness of constant vigilance. You're here, she said, and I caught the slightest edge of anxiety in her voice. Of course, it's the 15th. I always come on the 15th. I smiled, keeping my expression neutral and pleasant. How are you both doing? Is Harold feeling any better? Same as always. The money, please. I need to go lie down. My head is pounding. I reached into my pocket and activated the recorder with a subtle press of my thumb, then pulled out the envelope. But instead of handing it over immediately, I held it back slightly. Evelyn, I wanted to talk to you about something. I'm almost finished with the payments, just a few months left. I was thinking maybe we could discuss what happens after. Maybe you and Harold could spend more time with Sophia. She really misses having grandparents in her life. Evelyn's face tightened. Just give me the money, Angela. We can talk about that later. It's just that she asks about you both all the time, and I never know what to tell her. She doesn't understand why you don't want to see her. We're old and sick, that's why. Now give me the money before I shut this door. I extended the envelope, and as Evelyn's hand shot out to take it, I deliberately fumbled, letting it slip from my fingers. It fell to the floor of the hallway, and instinctively, Evelyn opened the door wider to reach for it. In that brief moment, I saw past her into the apartment. What I saw made my heart stop. The apartment wasn't the cluttered, dark, elderly person space I'd imagined. It was neat, almost sterile, with closed doors leading to the back rooms. But more importantly, on the small table near the entrance, I saw something that didn't belong. A men's athletic shoe, size 11 or 12, far too large for elderly Harold with his bad hip. The shoe was modern, expensive-looking, with mud still caked on the sole. Evelyn snatched up the envelope and straightened, her eyes following my gaze to the shoe. For a fraction of a second, panic flashed across her face. That's Harold's, she said quickly, too quickly. His therapeutic shoe for his hip. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept the explanation, even though I knew Harold wore slippers and orthopedic sandals. Had for years. Of course. Well, I hope the money helps with his medications. I'll see you next month. I turned and walked away, forcing myself to move slowly, casually, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. As soon as I heard the door close and the deadbolt slide home, I pressed myself against the wall of the stairwell and listened. Voices, muffled but urgent, filtered through the door. She saw the shoe, Harold. I know she did. That was Evelyn, her voice high with stress. Calm down, woman. Even if she saw it, she doesn't know anything. She's been paying for 5 years without a single question. Harold's voice, stronger and clearer than the weak, elderly rasp he used when speaking to me. We need to tell him. He needs to be more careful. Tell him yourself when he comes tonight. I'm not dealing with his temper. I pulled out my phone and quickly snapped photos of the door, the apartment number, anything that might be useful later. Then I hurried down the stairs, my mind racing. They were going to contact Thomas tonight. That meant he'd probably show up at the apartment, following his usual pattern. If I could catch him on camera, or better yet, confront him myself with witnesses. No, confronting him alone would be stupid and dangerous. David's warning echoed in my mind. If he's desperate enough to fake his death, there's no telling what else he might do. But I could watch. I could document. I could gather enough evidence to take to the police and finally end this nightmare. When I reached my car, I sat in the driver's seat and pulled out the recorder, rewinding it to hear what I'd captured. The audio was surprisingly clear. Evelyn's voice demanding money, her slip when she'd mentioned Harold's therapeutic shoe, and most importantly, my own questions about the payment arrangement that established this as an ongoing debt collection, not a gift. I drove to David's apartment without calling ahead. He answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, game controller still in hand, but his expression shifted from annoyed to concerned the moment he saw my face. I need your help again, I said. Tonight, I need to stake out my in-laws' apartment and catch Thomas when he shows up. David set down the controller and listened as I explained everything. The shoe, the conversation I'd overheard, the pattern of visits. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Okay, he finally said, but we do this smart. We park where we can see the building entrance, we record everything we can from a safe distance, and at the first sign of trouble, we call the police. Agreed? Agreed. We spent the afternoon preparing. David had a decent camera with a telephoto lens that he'd bought for a photography class. We tested it, made sure the night vision settings worked, confirmed that we could get clear images from across the street. We planned our position, our escape route if needed, what we'd say if anyone questioned why we were sitting in a parked car for hours. At 11 p.m., we were in position, parked in a shadowed spot half a block from the apartment building with a clear view of the main entrance. The camera was set up, my phone was recording backup footage, and we'd each had enough coffee to keep us alert for hours. The neighborhood was quiet at this hour. Occasional cars passed, a few people walked by on their way home from late shifts, but mostly the street was empty. The windows of the apartment building glowed with scattered lights, including a dim glow from the 6th floor that I knew came from Evelyn and Harold's unit. At 1:23 a.m., a figure appeared at the end of the block, walking with purpose but not hurrying. Even from a distance, even in the poor lighting, I recognized the walk. That subtle hitch on the left side, the dip of the shoulder, the gait I'd watched for 7 years of marriage. That's him, I whispered, gripping David's arm. That's Thomas. David adjusted the camera, zooming in. Through the viewfinder screen, I watched as Thomas approached the building. He wore dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low, but he'd forgone the face mask tonight, perhaps feeling safer in the dead of night. As he passed under a streetlight, his face was briefly illuminated, and there was no doubt. Older, thinner, with a beard he'd never worn during our marriage, but unmistakably Thomas. He glanced around once, a quick surveillance of the street, then entered the building. David kept filming, capturing the timestamp, the clear view of Thomas's face, the confident way he opened the door as if he had every right to be there. We got him, David breathed. Angela, that's crystal clear footage. That's him alive, entering the building. This is evidence. But I wasn't satisfied with just this. Let's wait. Let's see how long he stays, if he leaves with anything. We waited. The minutes stretched into an hour. I imagined what was happening up in that apartment. Thomas greeting his parents, complaining about his hidden life, counting the money I delivered earlier that day, making plans for how to continue the deception. My stomach churned with anger and disgust. At 2:47 a.m., the building door opened again, and Thomas emerged carrying a dark backpack that looked heavy and full. The backpack hadn't been there when he entered. He'd come to collect something, probably the money, possibly other supplies his parents had bought for him with my payments. David filmed him walking away, disappearing down the same street he'd arrived from. We waited 5 more minutes to be safe. Then David turned to me, his eyes serious in the dim light. What now? He asked. Now I find out where he's staying, I said. He has to live somewhere close enough to make these trips regularly. Somewhere cheap and anonymous where he can hide. Over the next 3 days, I became someone I barely recognized. I took a week off work, telling them I had a family emergency, which wasn't exactly a lie. I dropped Sophia at my mother's house, saying I needed to handle some complicated estate issues related to Thomas, which also wasn't exactly a lie. Then I devoted myself entirely to tracking my supposedly dead husband. I started with Thomas's old friend, Marcus, calling him back with more questions. Did Thomas have any favorite places? Any spots where he might hide if he needed to disappear? Marcus mentioned a cousin who owned a rundown motel near the industrial district, the kind of place that rented by the week and didn't ask questions. I drove there, showed Thomas's photo to the clerk, and got nothing but suspicious looks and denials. Next, I tried the pool hall Marcus had mentioned, the place where Thomas had supposedly gotten into gambling debt. It was exactly as seedy as I'd imagined, a dimly lit space that smelled of cigarette smoke and stale beer, even though smoking had been banned indoors for years. I went in the afternoon when it was quiet and approached the bartender, an older man with tattooed forearms and a bored expression. "I'm looking for someone," I said, sliding a $20 bill across the bar along with a photo of Thomas from before his death. "He used to play poker here. Might have owed money to a guy called Snake." The bartender glanced at the photo, then at me, then at the 20. He took the bill and leaned in close. "Haven't seen him in years. He disappeared, people said he died. Snake was pretty mad about it. Lost a lot of money when this guy vanished. Why are you asking?" "Just tying up loose ends," I said vaguely. "If Snake lost money, does that mean Thomas's debt wasn't paid?" The bartender shrugged. "Far as I know, Snake wrote it off as a loss. Figured the guy was dead, can't collect from a corpse. But if he found out this guy was alive..." He drew a finger across his throat in a slicing motion. "Snake don't forget debts." I left the pool hall with more questions than answers. If Thomas's gambling debt had been written off, why was he still hiding? Unless the debt had been bigger than Marcus knew. Unless there were other people he owed, other reasons to stay dead. I spent another day tracking down Thomas's former co-workers, people he'd known before Alaska, anyone who might have information. Most claimed they hadn't heard from him in years, seemed genuinely surprised I was asking about him at all. But one, a mechanic named Jerome, who'd worked with Thomas at an auto shop, gave me something useful. "You know, a few months back, I could have sworn I saw Thomas," Jerome said, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "I was delivering a part to a garage over in the warehouse district, and I saw this guy who looked just like him but skinnier, with a beard. He was going into one of those storage unit places, you know, the kind where you can rent a unit with a garage door. I almost called out to him, but then I remembered he'd died, so I figured it was just someone who looked similar." My heart raced. "Do you remember which storage place?" "Yeah, Secure Space Storage on Industrial Boulevard. The one with the orange doors." I drove there immediately, circling the facility slowly. It was a sprawling complex of storage units, some small, some large enough to park vehicles in. There were hundreds of units, and without a specific number, I had no way of knowing which one might be Thomas's, if any. But I had time, and I had motivation. I parked across the street and waited, watching people come and go, entering codes at the gate, driving in to access their units. I waited for hours until the sun set and the facility's security lights flickered on. At 9:47 p.m., a figure on a bicycle appeared, pedaling slowly down the street toward the storage facility. As he got closer, passing under the streetlights, I saw it was Thomas. He stopped at the gate, entered a code, and the gate rolled open. He cycled through, heading toward the back section of the facility. I quickly got out of my car and approached the gate on foot. Through the chain-link fence, I watched Thomas stop at a unit in the far corner, one of the larger ones with a roll-up garage door. He got off the bicycle, unlocked the door, pushed it up just high enough to duck under with a bike, then pulled it closed behind him. I'd found his hiding place. I'd actually found where Thomas was living. The urge to march over there, pound on that door, and demand answers was almost overwhelming. But I forced myself to think clearly. What would confronting him accomplish? He'd deny everything, or worse, he might panic and run, disappearing again before I could prove anything. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed evidence that he was living there, evidence that connected him to the fraud, evidence that would hold up when I finally went to the authorities. I pulled out my phone and called David. I found him. I found where he's staying. Are you serious? Where? A storage unit. He's literally living in a storage unit in the warehouse district. Can you meet me here? I need you to help me document this. David arrived 20 minutes later, and together we set up a surveillance position with a clear view of Thomas's unit. We filmed the exterior, documented the unit number, captured footage of the bicycle parked outside. Then we waited to see if Thomas would emerge again. He didn't come out that night, but we returned the next evening and the next, building a pattern of evidence. We filmed him leaving the unit to buy food at a nearby convenience store. We filmed him returning late at night from his trips to his parents' apartment. We documented everything, creating an undeniable timeline of his secret life. On the fourth night of surveillance, something different happened. Around 10 p.m., a black SUV pulled up to Thomas's storage unit. A large man got out, someone I didn't recognize, and knocked on the door. Thomas emerged, and the two men talked for several minutes. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the body language was tense. The large man seemed to be doing most of the talking, gesturing emphatically, while Thomas nodded and occasionally shook his head. Finally, Thomas went back into the unit and emerged with a thick envelope, which he handed to the man. The man opened it, counted what was inside, then nodded and returned to his SUV. Before driving away, he leaned out the window and said something that made Thomas visibly flinch. "Did you get that?" I asked David, every second. "That looked like a payment of some kind. Angela, I think your husband is still paying off his debts. That's why he's still hiding. He faked his death to buy time, but he's still on the hook." It made horrible sense. Thomas hadn't escaped his debts by dying, he'd just changed the payment arrangement. And to make those payments, he needed steady income, which he got by having his parents extort money from me under the guise of repaying their loan. I was funding his continued survival, funding his payments to whoever that man in the SUV worked for, all while believing I was honoring my dead husband's obligations. The cruelty of it was staggering. He'd found a way to make his own wife and child pay for his mistakes, to turn our love and grief into a revenue stream. And he'd done it all while hiding in a storage unit, living like a rat in the walls while we struggled. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind churning through everything I'd learned. Thomas was alive. He was living in a storage unit. He was still paying off gambling debts. His parents were accomplices in defrauding me. And my daughter, sweet Sophia, had grown up without a father because her father had chosen money and survival over his own family. The next morning, I made a decision. I was done investigating. I had enough evidence to prove fraud, enough to prove Thomas was alive and complicit in stealing from me. It was time to bring in the authorities and end this once and for all. But first, I wanted one more thing. I wanted to hear Thomas admit what he'd done. I wanted to record him explaining in his own words why he'd betrayed us so completely. I wanted that confession, not for the police, but for me, for Sophia, for the day when she'd be old enough to ask why her father had abandoned her. I spent that day planning my final move, the confrontation that would bring everything into the light. David tried to talk me out of it, arguing it was too dangerous, that I should just take what we had to the police and let them handle it. But I was adamant. I'd spent 5 years paying for Thomas's sins. I'd earned the right to look him in the eye and make him answer for what he'd done. Fine, David finally relented. But I'm coming with you, and we're doing this in broad daylight with people around. No late-night confrontations in empty storage facilities. We decided to do it at the apartment at the next monthly payment. I would go to Evelyn and Harold's place as usual, but this time I'd bring David as a witness. I'd confront them about the fraud, about Thomas being alive, and I'd force them to call him. When he showed up, thinking he was safe, I'd be waiting with cameras rolling and police on speed dial. It was risky, but it was also poetic. The fraud had started at that apartment, with Evelyn's accusations and demands. It seemed fitting that it should end there too. The 15th of the month arrived again, but this time I didn't feel dread climbing those 6 flights of stairs. I felt power. I felt control. David walked beside me, a small camera concealed in his jacket, his phone ready to call 911 at any moment. When we reached the 6th floor, I knocked on the door of 608 with more force than usual. Evelyn opened it with the chain still attached, and her eyes widened when she saw David standing beside me. "Who's this?" "You can't bring strangers here." "This is my cousin David. He's here as a witness." "Evelyn, I know Thomas is alive. I know you and Harold have been helping him steal from me. I have video evidence, audio recordings, and documented proof of fraud. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to invite us inside. You're going to call Thomas and tell him to come here immediately. And we're all going to wait together for the police to arrive." The color drained from Evelyn's face. Behind her, I heard Harold's voice, stronger and clearer than he'd ever used with me before. "Who's there? What's going on?" "I know everything. I said loudly, addressing Harold as well. The storage unit, the payments to the man in the SUV, all of it. This is over. You can cooperate now and maybe things go easier for you. Or I can call the police right now and let them break down this door. Your choice. For a long moment, Evelyn just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Then slowly, she closed the door, and I heard the chain slide back. The door opened fully, and for the first time in 5 years, I stepped inside my in-laws' apartment. What I saw there would change everything I thought I knew about Thomas's disappearance, and the truth, when it finally came out, would be far worse than anything I'd imagined. The apartment was nothing like I'd imagined. I'd pictured clutter and darkness, the stuffy disorder of elderly people living in grief and poverty. Instead, the space was surprisingly neat, almost Spartan, with cheap but functional furniture arranged with military precision. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking out all natural light, and the air smelled stale, like a room that had been sealed for too long. But what struck me most were the details that didn't fit the narrative I'd been fed for 5 years. On the kitchen counter sat a new coffee maker, expensive, the kind with all the electronic settings. Beside it, a stack of energy drinks and protein bars, not the tea and bland crackers I'd expect from elderly people with health problems. The trash bin overflowed with takeout containers, pizza boxes, and beer bottles. In the corner, a laptop sat on a small desk, its screen dark but a power light blinking. Elderly Harold with his bad hip supposedly couldn't manage stairs, but they had a computer and internet access. Harold himself sat in the living room recliner, and seeing him now, without the door as a barrier, I realized he wasn't as frail as he'd always pretended to be. He was thin, yes, and his hair was gray, but his eyes were sharp and calculating, and he stood up from the chair with far more ease than someone with a debilitating hip injury should manage. "You've made a terrible mistake coming here," he said, his voice lacking any of the weak quaver he'd always used before. This was a different man entirely, harder and colder. "The only mistake was trusting you," I shot back. "Both of you. For 5 years you've stolen from me while I struggled to support your granddaughter. You watched Sophia grow up without a father, knowing the whole time that Thomas was alive." Evelyn had backed up against the wall, her face pale and pinched. "You don't understand. You don't know what you're dealing with. Then explain it to me. Call Thomas. Tell him to come here and explain why he let his own daughter think she was fatherless." Harold and Evelyn exchanged a look, some wordless communication passing between them. Finally, Harold sighed and pulled a cell phone from his pocket, an incongruous modern smartphone that seemed out of place in his elderly hands. He dialed, waited, then spoke tersely into the phone. "We have a problem. Your wife is here, and she knows. She knows everything. No, I don't know how. She has someone with her. She says she has evidence. You need to come now." He listened for a moment, his expression growing darker, then ended the call. "He's coming. He'll be here in 20 minutes. "Good," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, despite my racing heart. "We'll wait." David positioned himself near the door, his body language making it clear he was blocking any escape route. I sat on the worn couch, forcing myself to appear calm even though every nerve in my body was firing. This was it, the moment I'd been building toward for weeks. In 20 minutes, I'd see Thomas face to face. In 20 minutes, I'd finally get answers. The minutes crawled by in tense silence. Evelyn kept wringing her hands and shooting anxious glances at Harold. Harold sat rigid in his recliner, staring at nothing, his jaw clenched. I used the time to look around more carefully, noting details I'd need to report to the police. A stack of mail on the side table addressed to Harold, but the return addresses were from credit card companies and banks, statements from accounts that supposedly had no money. On a shelf, I spotted a photo frame I recognized, one that used to sit in my living room. It was a picture of Thomas and Sophia, taken when she was just a baby, both of them laughing. Seeing it here, in this place of lies, made rage surge through me so intensely I had to grip the couch cushion to keep my hands from shaking. At minute 18, we heard footsteps on the stairs, rapid and heavy. Someone was taking the steps 2 at a time, rushing. The footsteps reached the landing, paused, then approached the door. A key scraped in the lock, and the door swung open. Thomas stood in the doorway, breathing hard from his sprint up 6 flights, his eyes wild and panicked. For a moment, we just stared at each other, husband and wife, across the chasm of 5 years of lies. He'd aged, his face thinner and harder than I remembered, with new lines around his eyes and mouth. The beard was scraggly and unkempt, his hair longer than he'd ever worn it. He wore cheap clothes, a faded t-shirt and worn jeans, and he smelled of sweat and desperation. "Angela," he said, and hearing my name in his voice after so long was like a physical blow. "I can explain." "Explain?" I stood up, my voice rising. "Explain how you let our daughter think her father was dead? Explain how you've been stealing from us for 5 years? Explain why a man who supposedly loved his family would fake his own death and hide like a coward?" Thomas stepped inside and closed the door, his eyes darting to David and back to me. "You don't understand the situation. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice, Thomas. You chose gambling over your family. You chose debt over your daughter. You chose to let me pay for your mistakes instead of being a man and facing them yourself." He flinched at that, something that might have been shame crossing his face. "The debt wasn't just gambling. It started there, yeah, but it became so much more. I owed money to people who would have killed me, Angela. Actually killed me. And when they couldn't find me, they would have come after you and Sophia. Faking my death protected you." "Protected us?" I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "You think making us believe you were dead was protection? Do you know what it did to Sophia? She had nightmares for 2 years, Thomas. She used to wake up crying, asking why Daddy didn't love her enough to stay alive. She blamed herself, thought maybe if she'd been a better daughter, you wouldn't have left." I saw his face crumble at that, genuine pain breaking through his defensive anger. I never wanted that. I thought she'd be better off thinking I died a hero, working to provide for the family, than knowing the truth about what I'd become." "The truth?" David spoke up from his position by the door. "The truth is, you're a coward who let his wife and child suffer while you hid in a storage unit, stealing their money to pay your debts. That's the truth." Thomas's eyes hardened as he looked at David. "Who the hell are you? I'm the person who's been helping Angela uncover your fraud. And I'm a witness to everything that's about to happen here." Thomas turned back to me, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out a way out of this. "What do you want, Angela? Why are you here?" "I want the truth, all of it. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me everything. Why you really left, who you owe money to, how much, and why you've continued this charade for 5 years when your debts were supposedly written off." He was quiet for a long moment, then moved to sit on the arm of his mother's chair. Evelyn reached up and gripped his arm, a gesture of support or perhaps plea. When Thomas finally spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reciting facts about someone else's life. It started small, just weekend poker games with guys from the shop. "I was good at it, or I thought I was. I'd win more than I lost, brought home extra money. You remember, don't you? Those months where I'd surprise you with nice dinners, new clothes for Sophia?" I did remember. That brief period about 6 months before Alaska, when Thomas had seemed flush with cash and unusually generous. "Then I got invited to bigger games," he continued. "Higher stakes, serious players. I should have known better, but I was cocky. I thought I could beat them. Instead, I lost. A lot. I lost $15,000 in one night, money I didn't have. The man running the game, they called him Viper. He gave me 2 weeks to pay up or face consequences." "So you took money from your parents," I said. "I took money from my parents," he confirmed. "Told them it was for the Alaska job, for certifications and equipment. They gave it to me because they trusted me. And I went to Alaska, but not to work. I went because Viper had connections there, ran operations in multiple states. I thought if I could get away, work the rigs, make good money, I could pay him back and come home clean." "But you didn't pay him back." Thomas shook his head. "I got up there and realized the rig work was brutal, dangerous. I wasn't cut out for it. I started playing cards with the workers, trying to win money faster. Instead, I lost more. I borrowed from loan sharks in Alaska, got in even deeper. Then Viper's people found me up there. They told me I owed $35,000 now, with interest, and if I didn't pay, they'd go after my family." "So you staged your death," David said. "I staged my death," Thomas confirmed. "I met a guy who worked at a crematorium who could provide fake documentation for the right price. I paid him with the last money I had, got the death certificate, the urn of ashes that were actually just industrial waste. I sent it all back here with a friend who pretended to be from the contracting company." Evelyn spoke up, her voice trembling. "We thought we were saving his life. When he called and told us what he'd done, we were horrified, but he was our son. We couldn't let him die." "So you helped him steal from me instead," I said coldly. You made up a debt that I supposedly owed you, knowing I'd pay it because I'm an honest person who honors my obligations. You used my integrity against me." Harold had the decency to look away. It wasn't supposed to be for this long. Thomas said he'd come back after a year or two, fake a mistaken identity situation, say he'd lost his memory. But the debts kept following him. Thomas took over the narrative. Viper's people never believed I was dead. They kept watching, waiting. I had to stay hidden, keep paying them off little by little. The money from you and my parents, it went to keeping them from investigating too closely, from looking for me in Detroit. Every payment bought me another month of safety. And what about us? My voice broke, the anger giving way to raw pain. What about Sophia and me? We weren't worth the risk of telling the truth? You were safer not knowing, Thomas insisted. If Viper's people thought you knew I was alive, they would have used you to get to me. This way, you were genuinely grieving, genuinely innocent. They had no reason to bother you. I stood up, my whole body shaking. You're still lying. You're lying right now. The man from the storage facility, the one you gave the envelope to last week, that wasn't Viper's person. That was someone else. You have other debts, don't you? You've been gambling again. Thomas's face went pale. You've been watching me? I've been investigating you. I have video of you entering this apartment. I have footage of you living in that storage unit. I have audio recordings of your parents confirming the fraud. I have everything I need to send all three of you to prison. The room went deathly silent. Evelyn started crying, soft, desperate sobs. Harold stared at the floor. Thomas looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between fear and a strange kind of relief. So that's it then, he said quietly. You're going to destroy what's left of my life. Turn me in. Let Viper's people find me. Probably get me killed. What's left of your life? I repeated incredulously. Thomas, you don't have a life. You're existing in a storage unit, running from debts you'll never be able to pay, alienated from your own child. That's not life. That's a slow death. At least if you face the consequences. If you go to the police yourself, maybe you can get protection. Maybe you can make a deal. The police can't protect me from Viper. Then why are you still here? I demanded. If these people are so dangerous, why haven't you left the state, left the country? Why are you still in Detroit, still close enough to visit your parents and collect money from your wife? Thomas didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his hands, and when he spoke again, his voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear him. Because I'm a coward. Because running away completely would mean admitting I've lost everything. As long as I'm close, as long as I can watch you and Sophia from a distance sometimes, I can pretend I haven't completely destroyed my life. I've seen her, you know. Watched her go to school, saw her in a basketball game once. She's beautiful, smart. She looks like you. The admission should have moved me, but instead it filled me with disgust. You've been stalking your own daughter while she thinks you're dead. That's sick, Thomas. That's beyond cruel. I know, he said, and for the first time I heard genuine anguish in his voice. I know what I've become. I know what I've done to you, to her, to my parents. I hate myself for it every day. But I didn't know how to stop. Once you start lying, once you build this whole structure of deception, you can't just tear it down. Too many people get hurt. We're already hurt, I shouted. We've been hurt for 5 years. The only difference now is that the truth is coming out, and you're going to face consequences for what you've done. Thomas stood up abruptly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Fine. You want consequences? You want justice? What happens to Sophia when her father goes to prison? What happens when she learns that not only am I alive, but I'm a criminal and a fraud? You think that's better for her than believing I died trying to provide for the family? Don't you dare, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Don't you dare use our daughter as an excuse for your cowardice. She deserves the truth, whatever it is. She deserves to know that her father's absence wasn't her fault, wasn't because he stopped loving her. Even if the truth is ugly, it's better than the lie she's been living. David cleared his throat. Angela, maybe we should call the police now. But before he could pull out his phone, Thomas held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. Wait. Just wait. If you're going to destroy everything, at least let me tell you the whole truth first. You deserve that much. You deserve to know exactly what kind of man you married. I sat back down, my heart pounding. Talk. Thomas began to pace, unable to stand still, his words coming faster now, like a dam had broken. The gambling, the debts to Viper, that was all true. But there's more. When I first went to Alaska, before everything fell apart, I met someone, another woman. Her name was Lydia. She worked at a bar near the oil fields. We had an affair. The words hit me like a physical blow. Of all the betrayals, somehow this one cut deepest. You had an affair. I'm not proud of it. It was brief, just a few months, but I fell for her. I thought about leaving you, starting over with her. But then the gambling debts caught up with me. And Lydia made it clear she wasn't interested in a man with my kind of problems. She left me, and I was alone up there, drowning in debt, too ashamed to come home. Evelyn made a small sound of distress. Thomas, you never told us this. I couldn't tell you, Ma. I couldn't tell anyone. But Angela should know. She should know that when I faked my death, part of me was relieved. Relieved that I didn't have to face her, didn't have to admit what I'd done, who I'd become. It was easier to be dead than to be the man who'd cheated on his wife, gambled away his future, and disappointed everyone who ever believed in him. I felt tears running down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. I wanted him to see them, wanted him to see exactly what his confession was doing to me. So all of this, the fake death, the stolen money, all of it was because you were too much of a coward to face the consequences of your own choices. Yes, Thomas said simply. I'm a coward. I've always been a coward. I ran from my problems instead of facing them, and I let good people pay the price. You, Sophia, my parents, everyone got hurt because I couldn't stand up and be a man. Harold spoke up, his voice heavy with disappointment. Son, how could you? We raised you better than this. You raised me to be better than this, Thomas agreed. But somewhere along the way, I made choices that turned me into this person. And the worst part is, I kept making those choices over and over, even when I knew they were wrong. The affair, the gambling, the fake death, and then continuing to take money from Angela, even when I didn't absolutely need it anymore. I looked up sharply. What do you mean, didn't need it? Thomas stopped pacing and met my eyes. The debt to Viper, I paid it off 18 months ago. I've been free of that obligation for a year and a half. The room spun. I gripped the couch to keep from falling. You've been free for 18 months? Then why? Why did you keep taking the money? Because I got comfortable with it, he said, his voice hollow. I got used to having that steady income. I've been using it to pay off the loan sharks in Alaska, yeah, but also just to live. To eat, to survive, to occasionally buy things that made my miserable existence slightly less miserable. I told myself I deserved it after everything I'd been through, that you owed me for the years of marriage, for giving you Sophia. I told myself all kinds of lies to justify continuing the fraud. Oh my God, David breathed. You're actually worse than we thought. Evelyn was crying openly now. Thomas, how could you do this to Angela, to your own child? I don't know, Ma. I really don't know. I think somewhere along the way I stopped seeing them as real people and started seeing them as just resources, a way to fund my survival. I know that makes me a monster. I stood up again, my legs shaky but my resolve hardening. You're right, that does make you a monster. And I'm done listening to your confessions. David, call the police. Tell them we have evidence of fraud, document forgery, and I want to press full charges. Angela, wait, Thomas said, moving toward me. David immediately stepped between us, his hands up in a defensive posture. Don't come near her, David warned. Thomas stopped, his hands raised. I'm not going to hurt her. I want to give you something. Information that might help you get back some of what you've lost. What information? I asked warily. Thomas walked to the desk with the laptop and opened a drawer. He pulled out a notebook, the kind with a black and white marbled cover, and held it out toward me. David took it and handed it to me, keeping himself between Thomas and me. I opened the notebook and found pages of detailed entries, dates, amounts, descriptions. It was a complete ledger of every payment I'd made, every dollar that had come through his parents to him, and more importantly, where that money had gone. Bank account numbers, names of creditors, amounts paid to various people. It was a roadmap of the entire fraud, documented in Thomas's own handwriting. This is everything, he said. Every transaction, every lie, all of it written down. I kept records because I'm paranoid, always worried someone would come after me and I'd need proof of what I'd paid. But now you can have it. Use it to recover whatever you can. Use it to press charges. Use it however you want. I flipped through the pages, stunned. This was more than just evidence of fraud. It was a complete confession, detailed enough to potentially help me recover funds, pursue civil charges, maybe even get restitution. Why are you giving me this? Thomas sat down heavily in the chair, looking suddenly exhausted and old. Because I'm tired. I'm so tired of running, of lying, of being this person. Maybe facing consequences is the only way I'll ever be able to stop hating myself. Maybe prison is exactly what I deserve. It is, I said coldly, but this doesn't make up for what you've done. This doesn't erase 5 years of pain. I know, nothing can erase that. But maybe it's a start toward you and Sophia getting some kind of closure, some kind of justice. I closed the notebook and held it tightly against my chest. Then I looked at Evelyn and Harold, who sat together looking older and smaller than I'd ever seen them. What about you two? Do you have anything you want to say? Evelyn spoke through her tears. We're sorry, Angela. We love our son, but we know what we did was wrong. We helped him steal from you, and there's no excuse for that. We let our love for him blind us to the pain we were causing you and Sophia. Harold nodded, his face gray. We'll cooperate with whatever charges you bring. We'll testify if needed. We'll do whatever we can to help make this right, even though we know it can never really be right again. I looked at the three of them, this family that had once been my family, now revealed as strangers united in deception. I felt nothing but emptiness where love used to be. David, make the call, I said quietly. David pulled out his phone and dialed 911. As he spoke to the dispatcher, explaining the situation and requesting officers be sent to the address, I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain slightly. The street below looked normal, peaceful, completely unaware that in this 6th-floor apartment, a 5-year lie was finally coming to an end. Thomas didn't try to run. He sat in the chair, staring at nothing, occasionally wiping his eyes. His parents held hands, whispering to each other, preparing themselves for what was coming. And I stood by the window, the notebook pressed against my heart, thinking about Sophia and how I was going to explain any of this to her. The police arrived 12 minutes later. I heard their heavy footsteps on the stairs, the crackle of their radios. David opened the door to let them in, 2 uniformed officers and a detective in plainclothes who'd apparently been working nearby, and responded to what the dispatcher had flagged as a fraud case with unusual circumstances. I'm Detective Sarah Morrison, the woman in plainclothes said, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. Someone want to tell me what's going on here? I stepped forward. My name is Angela Chen. 5 years ago, my husband, Thomas Chen, supposedly died in Alaska. His death was faked. He's been living in hiding while his parents helped him defraud me of over $14,000 under the pretense of repaying a family debt. I have video evidence, audio recordings, and this ledger detailing the entire fraud. I handed the notebook to Detective Morrison, who began flipping through it, her expression growing more serious with each page. She looked up at Thomas. Sir, are you Thomas Chen? I am, Thomas said quietly. And is this ledger accurate? Did you fake your death and defraud your wife as she's described? Yes. All of it is true. Detective Morrison nodded to the uniformed officers. Read him his rights and take him into custody. You two as well, she said, gesturing to Evelyn and Harold. You're all being arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud and theft by deception. As the officers handcuffed Thomas, he looked at me one last time. Angela, tell Sophia. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her, even though I didn't know how to show it. Tell her she deserved a better father. I'll tell her the truth, I said. All of it. And she'll decide for herself what to think of you. They let him out, followed by his parents. Evelyn was crying. Harold was silent, both of them looking terrified and frail in a way that might have moved me if I hadn't known the truth about their deception. Detective Morrison stayed behind with David and me to take detailed statements. We spent 2 hours in that apartment, going through everything, the timeline of my payments, the security footage David had captured, the audio recordings, the photos of the storage unit, all of it. Detective Morrison was thorough and professional, asking pointed questions, taking notes, building what she said would be a solid case for the prosecution. With this much evidence and the defendant's confession, we should be able to pursue significant charges, she said. Fraud, conspiracy, forgery of death documents, potentially even identity fraud. You should also consult with a civil attorney about recovering your money and possibly seeking additional damages. Will they go to prison? I asked. Almost certainly. The amount stolen, the duration of the fraud, the deliberate deception, these are all aggravating factors. I'd expect Thomas to face several years. His parents possibly less given their age, and if they cooperate, but prison time is likely for all of them. I nodded, feeling strangely numb. This was what I'd wanted, justice, consequences, an end to the lies. So why did I feel so empty? David drove me home after we finished at the police station. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. We sat in his car outside my apartment for a long moment, neither of us speaking. "Are you okay?" David finally asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I got what I wanted. Thomas and his parents are going to face justice. I have evidence to recover at least some of the money they stole. But I don't feel victorious. I just feel tired." "You've been carrying this weight for 5 years," David said gently. "It's going to take time to process everything, to heal from it. And then I have to tell Sophia," I said, my voice breaking. "I have to tell my 9-year-old daughter that her father isn't dead. He's just a criminal who chose to abandon her. How do I do that, David? How do I explain something so cruel to a child?" David reached over and squeezed my hand. "You tell her the truth in an age-appropriate way. You reassure her that none of this is her fault. And you remind her that she has people who genuinely love her, starting with you. You're an amazing mother, Angela. You'll figure out how to help her through this." I wiped my eyes and took a deep breath. I need to pick her up from my mom's house. I need to hold her and remind myself why I did all of this. "Want me to come with you?" "No, I need to do this part alone, but thank you, David, for everything. I couldn't have gotten through this without you." He smiled sadly. "That's what family is for. Real family, not the kind that betrays you." I drove to my mother's house in a daze, my mind racing ahead to the conversation I'd have to have with Sophia. If not tonight, then soon. My mother answered the door with Sophia bouncing excitedly beside her. "Mommy! Grandma made cookies and we watched 2 movies." I scooped her up, holding her tight, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. She was solid and real and mine, and whatever else happened, I would protect her from as much pain as I could. "That sounds wonderful, baby. Thank you for watching her, Mom." My mother looked at me closely, reading something in my expression. "Angela, what's wrong? What happened?" "I'll explain later," I said quietly. "Right now, I just need to take my daughter home." In the car, Sophia chattered about her day, about the cookies, about a game she'd played with my mother's cat. I listened and made appropriate responses, but my mind was elsewhere, already beginning to plan. I'd need to find a therapist for Sophia, someone who specialized in helping children process trauma and loss. I'd need to consult with a lawyer about recovering the stolen money and possibly filing a civil suit. I'd need to prepare for a trial, for media attention if the story went public, for all the ways this revelation would ripple through our lives. But tonight, I just needed to be Mom. I needed to make dinner, help with homework, read bedtime stories, and maintain the illusion of normalcy for one more evening before everything changed. After Sophia was asleep, I sat on my couch with a glass of wine I didn't really want, and the notebook Thomas had given me open on my lap. I read through his entries, seeing 5 years of my life reduced to numbers and dates. Every payment documented, every lie recorded in his careful handwriting. On the last page, I found something I hadn't noticed before. A note addressed to me, written recently based on the fresh ink. "Angela, if you're reading this, it means you figured it out. You were always smarter than I gave you credit for. I know this doesn't make anything better, but I want you to know that I did love you once. Real love, before I ruined it with my selfishness and weakness. You deserve so much better than me. Sophia deserves so much better than me. I hope someday you can both forgive me, though I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I hope you can move on and build a happy life without the weight of my lies holding you down. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and destroying our family is my greatest regret. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. T." I closed the notebook and let myself cry for the first time all day. Not for Thomas, not for what I'd lost, but for what could have been if he'd been the man I'd believed him to be. For the family we could have built if he'd chosen differently. For the father Sophia deserved but would never have. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, police interviews, lawyer consultations, the beginning of the legal process that would put Thomas and his parents in prison. Tomorrow I'd have to start figuring out how to tell Sophia a truth that would break her heart. But tonight, I let myself grieve for the last time. Tomorrow I'd start rebuilding. The days following the arrests blurred together in a haze of legal proceedings, police interviews, and sleepless nights. Detective Morrison had been right about the strength of the case. With Thomas's full confession, the detailed ledger, and all the video and audio evidence David and I had collected, the prosecutor's office moved quickly. Thomas was charged with fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit theft, and falsifying death records. Evelyn and Harold faced charges of conspiracy and fraud as accessories. The media got hold of the story within 48 hours. Man fakes death, Steals from widow wife made sensational headlines. My phone rang constantly with reporters requesting interviews. My email inbox flooded with messages from news outlets. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the impossible task ahead, telling Sophia the truth. I consulted with 3 different child psychologists before finding Dr. Patricia Reeves, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. She specialized in helping children process grief, trauma, and complex family situations. The most important thing, Dr. Reeves told me during our first consultation, is to be honest but age-appropriate. Sophia is 9. She's old enough to understand deception and consequences, but she doesn't need every graphic detail. Focus on the facts she needs to know. Her father is alive. He made very bad choices. None of it was her fault. And you'll help her through whatever feelings come up. What if she hates me for telling her? I asked. What if she thinks her father being alive is a good thing and resents me for sending him to prison? Dr. Reeves smiled gently. Children are remarkably resilient, and they have good instincts about people. She may have complicated feelings about her father. That's normal and healthy. Your job isn't to make her feel a certain way. It's to support her through whatever she does feel and remind her that she's loved and safe. I scheduled a joint session for the following week, time for me to prepare and for Dr. Reeves to develop a plan for how to facilitate the conversation. In the meantime, I tried to maintain normalcy for Sophia. School, homework, basketball practice, bedtime stories. She asked a few times why I seemed sad or distracted, and I told her I was dealing with some grown-up problems, but everything would be okay. She accepted this with the easy trust of a child who'd always been able to rely on her mother. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks after the arrests. Thomas, Evelyn, and Harold had all been released on bail with the condition that they surrender their passports and remain in the Detroit area. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Karen Walsh, assured me that flight risk was minimal given their financial situation and the strength of the case against them. They're going to plead guilty, Walsh told me in a meeting at her office. Their attorneys have already approached us about a plea deal. Thomas is looking at 6 to 8 years with the possibility of parole after 4. His parents, given their age and cooperation, were offering 2 years with the possibility of house arrest, if the judge agrees. That's it, I said, anger flaring. 6 years for destroying my life, for stealing from his own child? I understand your frustration, Walsh said calmly. But a guilty plea means a guaranteed conviction, no risk of a trial going sideways, and faster restitution for you. If we go to trial, Thomas could potentially get more time, but trials are unpredictable. This way, we have certainty. I wanted to argue, to demand more punishment, but logically I knew she was right. What about the money? Can I recover what they stole? We're including restitution as part of the plea deal. Thomas and his parents will be required to repay you the full $14,000 plus interest. We're also seizing Thomas's few assets, though he doesn't have much. Additionally, you can file a civil suit for emotional damages, though collecting on that might be difficult given their financial situation. I left the prosecutor's office feeling hollow. The legal system was working, justice was being served, but it all felt inadequate compared to the magnitude of what had been taken from me. How do you put a price on 5 years of grief? How do you calculate damages for a child growing up believing her father was dead? The day came for Sophia's session with Dr. Reeves. I'd told her we were going to talk to someone about feelings, which wasn't unusual. We'd seen a grief counselor briefly after Thomas's supposed death. Sophia skipped into Dr. Reeves's office cheerfully, admiring the colorful artwork on the walls and the basket of toys in the corner. Dr. Reeves started with casual conversation, asking Sophia about school, her friends, her favorite activities. Sophia relaxed quickly, chatting about her basketball team and a book she was reading. Then, gently, Dr. Reeves shifted the conversation. Sophia, your mom has something important to tell you. It's going to be surprising and maybe confusing, but I want you to know that you're safe here and you can ask any questions you want, okay? Sophia looked at me with curious eyes. What is it, Mommy? I took a deep breath, reaching for her hand. Baby, do you remember when we talked about how Daddy died before you were old enough to really remember him? In Alaska, at his job, Sophia said, reciting the story she'd been told. He was trying to make money for us. That's what we believed, I said carefully. But I found out recently that it wasn't true. Daddy didn't die in Alaska. He's alive, sweetheart. Sophia's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, then sudden hope that broke my heart. He's alive? Where is he? Can I see him? This was the hard part. He's alive, but he's in trouble with the police. Sophia, Daddy made some very bad choices. He pretended to be dead because he owed money to dangerous people and he was scared. He's been hiding all this time, and he let us believe he was gone. The hope in Sophia's face crumbled into confusion. But why? Why would he do that? Didn't he want to see me? Tears streamed down my face. I don't know, baby. I think he was scared and made bad decisions that he didn't know how to fix. Sometimes adults make mistakes, even really big ones that hurt people they love. Did he know I thought he was dead? Did he know I was sad? Yes, he knew. Sophia pulled her hand away from mine, her small face crumpling. Then he didn't love me. If he loved me, he wouldn't let me be sad when he could have come home. Dr. Reeves spoke gently. Sophia, sometimes people love others but still make choices that hurt them. It doesn't mean the love isn't real, but it does mean that love isn't always enough to make people do the right thing. Your daddy's choices were about him and his problems, not about you or how much you're worth loving. I don't want to see him, Sophia said, her voice small and fierce. I don't want a daddy who would do that. I pulled her into my arms, and she buried her face in my shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs. We stayed like that for a long time while Dr. Reeves sat quietly, giving us space to feel the enormity of the truth. Over the following weeks, Sophia's emotional journey was complicated. Some days she was angry, acting out at school or at home, slamming doors and shouting that she hated her father. Other days she was withdrawn, quiet, seeming to retreat into herself. A few times she asked questions. Where was he living? Did he ever watch her play basketball? Did he think about her? I answered honestly but simply, protecting her from the worst details while giving her the truth she needed. Yes, he watched you sometimes from a distance. Yes, he thought about you. No, that doesn't excuse what he did or make it okay. Dr. Reeves helped us both navigate these turbulent waters. She taught Sophia coping strategies for her anger and sadness. She taught me how to validate Sophia's feelings without trying to fix them, how to be present with her pain without trying to explain it away. The question of whether Sophia should see Thomas came up repeatedly. His lawyer contacted me twice asking if I'd permit a visit, claiming Thomas was desperate to apologize to his daughter. I refused both times. He doesn't get to unload his guilt on her, I told Dr. Reeves. If Sophia decides someday that she wants to see him, talk to him, try to build some kind of relationship, that will be her choice when she's old enough to make it. But right now, she's a child, and my job is to protect her from further harm. Dr. Reeves agreed. You're making the right call. Sophia needs time to process this without the pressure of his presence and his needs. The plea hearing took place on a cold morning in November, 6 weeks after the arrests. I attended with David beside me for support, sitting in the gallery as Thomas, Evelyn, and Harold stood before the judge. Thomas looked gaunt, his beard shaved off, wearing an ill-fitting suit that made him look like a stranger. His parents looked small and frightened, holding hands as they faced the consequences of their choices. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, named Judge Patricia Henderson, reviewed the plea agreements with clinical precision. She asked each defendant if they understood the charges, if they understood the terms of the plea, if they were entering their pleas voluntarily. Each answered yes in quiet, defeated voices. Before I accept these pleas, Judge Henderson said, I want to address you, Mr. Chen. You stand before this court having admitted to a scheme of extraordinary cruelty. You faked your own death and allowed your wife and child to suffer for 5 years, all while stealing from them to fund your hidden life. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Thomas stood silent for a moment, then spoke, his voice hoarse. Honor, there's nothing I can say that would make this right or explain it adequately. I was a coward who made terrible choices and compounded them with more terrible choices. My daughter deserved better. My wife deserved better. I have no excuse, only profound regret. Judge Henderson's expression didn't soften. Regret is insufficient, Mr. Chen. You have destroyed your family's trust and stolen years of their lives with your deception. However, given your full cooperation and guilty plea, I'm prepared to accept the plea agreement as presented. You will serve 6 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 4. You will be required to pay full restitution to your wife in the amount of $14,300 plus interest, with a payment plan to begin upon your release. Do you understand these terms? Yes, Your Honor. The judge accepted Evelyn and Harold's pleas as well, sentencing them each to 2 years, which they would serve under house arrest given their age and health conditions, plus joint responsibility for the restitution. As the bailiffs prepared to take Thomas into custody, he turned and looked directly at me. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. I wanted him to see that I'd survived his betrayal, that I was still standing. After a moment, he mouthed 2 words, "I'm sorry." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. Sorry didn't restore 5 years. Sorry didn't heal Sophia's broken heart. Sorry was just another word, and I'd had enough of Thomas's words to last a lifetime. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. David and I pushed through them to his car, and he drove me home in silence. When we arrived at my apartment, I sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. "It's done," I said quietly. "It's actually done." "How do you feel?" David asked, empty, relieved, angry, sad, all of it at once. I turned to look at him. "Thank you for being here through all of this. I literally couldn't have done it without you." "You would have found a way," David said. "You're one of the strongest people I know, Angela." I didn't feel strong. I felt wrung out, exhausted, like I'd been holding myself together through sheer will, and now that the crisis was over, I could finally fall apart. But I didn't have that luxury yet. Sophia needed me to stay whole, to be her rock while she processed her own pain. The media attention died down after a few weeks. The story of the man who faked his death was replaced by newer scandals and tragedies. Life began to return to something resembling normal, though normal looked different now. Sophia continued her sessions with Dr. Reeves, working through her feelings about her father. She wrote him letters she never sent, drew pictures of her anger and sadness, played out scenarios with dolls where daughters confronted fathers who'd abandoned them. Slowly, gradually, she began to heal. I focused on rebuilding our financial security. The restitution payments wouldn't begin until Thomas was released from prison, so I worked with a lawyer to file a civil suit against Evelyn and Harold for the emotional damages. Their house arrest meant they were living in their apartment, that same 6th-floor unit where so many lies had been told. I drove by it once, looked up at those windows, and felt nothing but the desire to never return there. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from Thomas. It had been forwarded through my lawyer, who'd been instructed to screen all correspondence from him. The lawyer had included a note. "This seems to be a genuine attempt at accountability rather than manipulation. I'm forwarding it, but you have no obligation to read it or respond." I almost threw it away unread, but late one night, after Sophia was asleep, I opened it. The letter was long, handwritten on prison stationery. Thomas wrote about his days, the monotony of prison life, the therapy he was receiving, the slow, painful process of confronting who he'd become and why. He wrote about his childhood, about feeling inadequate next to his successful siblings, about developing a need to prove himself that manifested in risky behavior and bad decisions. But mostly, he wrote about regret. Not the performative regret he'd shown in court, but raw, detailed accounting of specific moments he wished he could change. The night he'd chosen to go to that first high-stakes poker game, the moment he'd decided to fake his death instead of coming clean, the countless times he'd watched Sophia from a distance, knowing he could end her pain with a single phone call but choosing his own safety instead. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he wrote. "I know I've lost the right to be part of Sophia's life, and I've accepted that. But I want you to know that I'm working on becoming a better person, not because I think it will change anything between us, but because I owe it to the memory of the man I could have been. I'm taking classes, getting my GED, learning a trade so I can support myself when I get out without falling back into old patterns. I'm in therapy dealing with the gambling addiction I never admitted I had. I'm trying, Angela. It's far too late, but I'm trying." The letter ended with a request. If Sophia ever wants to know anything about me, if she ever has questions, please tell her the truth, all of it. Don't let her create some fantasy version of who I am. She deserves the truth, even if it's ugly, especially if it's ugly. And please tell her that her father's failures are not a reflection of her worth. She is extraordinary, and any inadequacy she might feel is mine alone, not hers to carry. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away in a folder with all the other legal documents from the case. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to engage with Thomas's redemption arc, if that's what this was. Maybe someday I'd share parts of it with Sophia if she asked, but for now it was just words on paper, and I'd had enough of his words. What mattered was building our new life. I got a promotion at work, a raise that finally let me breathe a little financially. I moved Sophia and me into a new apartment, 2 bedrooms with big windows and a park nearby, a place with no memories of Thomas or the life we'd lived waiting for him to come home from Alaska. I painted Sophia's room the color she chose, bright turquoise with white clouds on the ceiling. We picked out furniture together, new pieces that belonged only to us. Sophia joined a new basketball team and made new friends. She still had hard days, still sometimes cried about her father, still worked through anger and confusion in her therapy sessions. But she also laughed, played, dreamed about the future. She was resilient in the way children are, capable of holding pain and joy simultaneously, of healing while still carrying scars. One evening, about 8 months after the sentencing, Sophia and I were making dinner together when she asked, "Mom, do you think you'll ever get married again?" The question surprised me. "I don't know, honey. Why do you ask?" She stirred the pasta sauce carefully. "Because you're really pretty and nice, and you shouldn't have to be alone just because Dad was bad. You deserve someone who's good." My heart swelled with love for this incredible child who'd been through so much but could still think about my happiness. "Thank you, baby. Right now I'm happy with it being just you and me. But someday, maybe, if I meet the right person, I might consider it. How would you feel about that?" Sophia thought about it seriously. "I think I'd be okay with it. As long as they're nice to you and they like basketball." I laughed, pulling her into a hug. "Those are excellent criteria." That night, after Sophia was in bed, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea and thought about the journey we'd been on. From the moment Mrs. Patterson had told me the dead don't always stay dead to this moment, sitting in our new apartment with my daughter healing in the next room, it had been the hardest 8 months of my life. But I'd survived. We'd survived. More than that, we were building something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed, a life based on truth instead of lies, on resilience instead of fear, on the genuine love between a mother and daughter instead of the hollow promises of a man who'd chosen himself over his family. Thomas had stolen 5 years from us with his deception, but I wouldn't let him steal our future. Whatever came next, Sophia and I would face it together, stronger for having survived his betrayal, wiser for having learned that we could rely on ourselves when everything else fell apart. I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder where I'd been keeping all the documents related to the case. There was something I'd been putting off, something I knew I needed to do but hadn't found the courage for yet. I needed to write down our story, not for publication or revenge, but for Sophia. Someday, when she was older, she'd want to understand the full scope of what had happened, not just the sanitized version I'd been able to tell her at 9 years old. I started typing, beginning with that day on the 6th floor, the last payment I'd made before everything unraveled. The words came slowly at first, then faster, pouring out months of pain and anger and determination. I wrote about the investigation, the discoveries, the confrontation. I wrote about her father's confession, his weaknesses, his choices. But I also wrote about our strength, our resilience, the way we'd refused to let his betrayal define us. It took me 3 nights to finish, working after Sophia went to bed, the apartment quiet except for the click of my keyboard. When I was done, I had a document of nearly 50 pages, a complete record of how we'd uncovered the truth and survived it. I saved it with a password and tucked it away in a folder labeled for Sophia, when she's ready. The first year passed, then the second. Life settled into new rhythms. Sophia turned 11, then 12, growing taller and more confident, her talent on the basketball court earning her a spot on a competitive travel team. I started dating someone, a kind man named Marcus who worked as a teacher and had never once asked me about my infamous past when he could have easily Googled it. We took things slow, mindful of Sophia's feelings, and he won her over by actually learning about basketball and coming to her games. I heard occasional updates about Thomas through the legal system. He was model prisoner, taking classes, staying out of trouble, working toward early parole. Evelyn and Harold completed their house arrest and sold their apartment, moving to a smaller place in a different neighborhood. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that they were ashamed and broken, that they'd lost most of their friends when the truth came out. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, only a distant acknowledgement that consequences had occurred. The restitution payments began in the 4th year, when Thomas was released on parole. They came in small monthly installments, $50 at a time, deposited automatically into an account I'd set up specifically for Sophia's future. At this rate, it would take 24 years to repay what he'd stolen, and that was assuming he never missed a payment. I didn't hold my breath, but I documented each one carefully, just in case. Sophia was 13 when she first asked if she could read one of her father's letters. He'd been writing periodically, always through my lawyer, always respectful of my boundaries. I'd saved them all in a file, unopened after the first one, waiting for this day. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I asked her, sitting on her bed, the file folder between us. She nodded, her face serious beyond her years. "I've been talking about it with Dr. Reeves. She thinks I'm in a good place to hear his side, as long as I remember that his side doesn't excuse what he did or change anything." "That's very mature of you," I said, proud and heartbroken at once. She was so young to have to navigate such complicated emotions. "Do you want me to stay while you read, or would you prefer privacy?" "Stay," she said immediately. "Please." I handed her the most recent letter, from 3 months ago, and watched her face as she read. She went through a range of expressions: curiosity, anger, sadness, something that might have been pity. When she finished, she sat quietly for a moment, staring at the paper. "He sounds sad," she finally said. "He is sad. What he did cost him everything." "Good," Sophia said fiercely, then immediately looked guilty. "Is it bad that I think that's good?" "No, honey, it's human. He hurt you, and it's natural to want him to feel the consequences of that. You don't have to forgive him or feel sorry for him." "Do you forgive him?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. I'm not sure forgiveness is the right word for what I feel. I've let go of the anger because carrying it was hurting me more than him. I've accepted that he's a flawed person who made terrible choices. But forgive? That would require him to be someone different than who he actually is. I can't forgive someone who doesn't really exist. Sophia nodded slowly, processing this. "Can I write back to him?" The question caught me off guard. "If you want to, but you should think carefully about what you want to say and why you want to say it. You don't owe him a relationship or even a response. This is entirely your choice." "I want to tell him that I'm okay," she said. "That I have a good life and I'm happy. I want him to know that he didn't break me." Pride swelled in my chest. "That's a powerful thing to say. If you want to write that letter, I'll make sure he gets it." She wrote it that night, a single page in her careful handwriting. She showed it to me before sealing the envelope, and I read words that brought tears to my eyes. "Dear Dad, I'm writing to tell you that I'm okay. I'm 13 now, and I'm on a travel basketball team. I get good grades, and I have friends and a mom who loves me. I'm writing this because Dr. Reeves says it's important for me to tell you how I feel. So here it is. I'm angry that you left and sad that you lied and confused about why you did it. But I'm also okay. You don't get to be part of my life right now, maybe not ever, and that's my choice to make. I wanted you to know that I'm not broken. I'm strong and I'm happy, and I'm going to have a good life. Not because of you, but because of the people who actually stayed and helped me. Your daughter, Sophia." I mailed it the next day, and 2 weeks later, Thomas's response came through my lawyer. It was brief, just a few lines thanking Sophia for writing, telling her how proud he was of her strength, acknowledging that he'd lost the right to be called her father but would always hope she lived a beautiful life. He didn't ask for more contact or try to insert himself into her healing. For once, he did the right thing by staying in his lane. Life continued its forward motion. Sophia started high school, excelled academically and athletically, began talking about college basketball programs. Marcus and I got engaged, with Sophia's enthusiastic blessing, and began planning a small wedding. I'd rebuilt my savings, paid off debts, created financial security I'd never had during my marriage to Thomas. The scars remained. Sometimes Sophia had nightmares about abandonment. Sometimes I woke up anxious, checking bank accounts compulsively, making sure no one was stealing from us. We both still saw therapists, processing trauma that didn't have an expiration date. But the scars were just part of our story now, proof that we'd survived something difficult and come through it stronger. On the 5-year anniversary of the day I'd confronted Thomas in his parents' apartment, I took Sophia to dinner at her favorite restaurant. Over pasta and breadsticks, I raised my water glass in a toast. "To us," I said. "For surviving and thriving." Sophia clinked her glass against mine, grinning. "To us. We're pretty awesome. We really are." As we ate, Sophia said casually, "You know, I've been thinking about writing a college essay about Dad. About the whole thing." I tried to keep my expression neutral. Oh? What angle are you thinking? About resilience, I guess. About how people can hurt you, but they can't define you unless you let them. About how I had this huge thing happen when I was a kid, but it didn't stop me from having a good life. I think it might be a strong essay. I think it would be an incredible essay, I agreed. As long as you're writing it for you, not for him. Definitely for me. He doesn't get any more of my energy than I choose to give him. She paused, twirling pasta on her fork. Mom, can I ask you something? Always. Do you regret marrying him? If you could go back knowing everything, would you choose differently? It was a question I'd asked myself countless times. That's complicated, I said slowly. I regret the pain he caused. I regret the lies and the lost years and the money. But if I hadn't married him, I wouldn't have you. And you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. So no, I don't regret it because it led to you. Sophia's eyes got watery. That's really sappy, Mom. It's also really true. We finished dinner and walked home through the park, the evening air warm with approaching summer. Sophia linked her arm through mine, something she still did despite being a teenager who was usually too cool for public displays of affection. I'm glad we survived it, she said quietly. Me too, baby, me too. Thomas became eligible for parole after serving 4 years. I received notification from the parole board that they would be holding a hearing, and I had the right to attend and make a statement if I wished. I discussed it with Sophia, who was now 15, mature beyond her years from everything she'd been through. Do you want to go? She asked. To the hearing? I'm not sure, I admitted. Part of me wants to make sure they understand the full impact of what he did. Part of me just wants to be done with him entirely. I think you should go, Sophia said thoughtfully. Not for him, but for you. You've never really gotten to say everything you wanted to say to him, not with me there or with lawyers controlling the conversation. Maybe this is your chance to really tell him how his choices affected us. She was right. In all the proceedings, I'd given statements through lawyers, written impact letters that were read by prosecutors, but I'd never stood face to face with Thomas and told him exactly what his betrayal had cost. Maybe it was time. I attended the hearing alone, Marcus offering to come but me declining, needing to do this by myself. The parole board room was institutional and cold, with fluorescent lights and cheap plastic chairs. Thomas sat at a table with his attorney, wearing prison-issued clothes, his hair graying at the temples. He looked older, quieter, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. The hearing began with Thomas's attorney presenting evidence of his rehabilitation, completion of educational programs, steady work assignments, therapy participation, spotless disciplinary record. Character witnesses spoke on his behalf, including a prison counselor who testified about Thomas's genuine remorse and personal growth. Then it was my turn. I stood at the podium, my prepared statement in hand, and looked directly at Thomas for the first time in 4 years. My name is Angela Chen, I began, my voice steady. I'm here to speak about the impact Thomas Chen's crimes had on me and our daughter. 4 years ago, when the truth came out, I thought the hardest part would be the betrayal itself, discovering my husband was alive and had been stealing from us. But I was wrong. The hardest part has been watching our daughter struggle to understand why her father chose money and self-preservation over her. Thomas's eyes were fixed on the table, but I kept going. Sophia was 9 years old when she learned the truth. She's 15 now. For 6 years of her childhood, she believed her father was dead. She grieved him, missed him, developed anxiety about loss and abandonment that she still deals with in therapy. And then she learned he'd been alive the whole time, watching her from a distance, and had chosen to let her suffer rather than face his own mistakes. I paused, gathering my thoughts. The financial theft, the $14,000, that's quantifiable. We can put a number on that damage. But how do you quantify the cost of a child's trust? How do you calculate the value of years she'll never get back? Thomas Chen didn't just steal money from us. He stole Sophia's sense of security in the world. He stole her ability to trust that people who say they love her will actually stay. He stole her childhood innocence. Now I looked directly at the parole board. I'm not here to argue he should never be released. I understand that rehabilitation is possible and that he's apparently made efforts to change, but I want this board to understand that the consequences of his actions extend far beyond his prison sentence. My daughter will be dealing with what he did for the rest of her life. That's the real sentence he imposed, not on himself, but on an innocent child who deserved better. I sat down, my hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. Thomas's attorney called him to speak next. Thomas stood, his movements careful, and addressed the board directly. "I want to thank Mrs. Chen for her statement," he said, his voice rough. "Everything she said is true. I did steal from my family. I did let my daughter suffer unnecessarily. I did choose the easy path of deception over the hard path of facing my responsibilities." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "I've spent 4 years thinking about the moment when I decided to fake my death. I've tried to understand the person I was then, and honestly, I don't recognize him. I was drowning in debt and fear, and instead of reaching out for help, I convinced myself that disappearing was protecting my family. But I was really just protecting myself." He glanced briefly at me, then away. "The programs I've completed here, the therapy, the education, none of it changes what I did. It doesn't give Sophia back the years I stole. It doesn't erase Angela's pain or repay the trust I violated. All it does is help me understand how I became someone capable of such cruelty and hopefully prevent me from making similar choices in the future." Thomas turned back to the parole board. "If you release me, I won't try to contact my daughter unless she explicitly requests it. I'll continue making restitution payments. I'll stay in therapy and continue working on the addiction issues that led to this situation. I'll try to build a life that's honest and productive. But I want to be clear. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I've lost the right to be part of their lives. I'm just asking for the chance to prove I can be a functioning member of society, even if it's a society that doesn't include my family." The board deliberated for 30 minutes while we waited in separate rooms. When they called us back, the chairwoman delivered their decision with professional detachment. "Mr. Chen, after considering your rehabilitation efforts, your clean disciplinary record, the statements provided, and the nature of your original offense, this board has decided to grant parole with the following conditions. You will maintain employment, continue therapy for gambling addiction, make all required restitution payments, and have no contact with the victims except as they may initiate. You will report to a parole officer weekly for the first 6 months, then monthly thereafter. Any violation of these conditions will result in immediate return to custody to serve the remainder of your sentence. Do you understand these terms?" "Yes, ma'am," Thomas said quietly. Just like that, it was over. Thomas would be released within 2 weeks. I left the building feeling strangely hollow. I'd said what I needed to say, but it hadn't brought the catharsis I'd hoped for. Justice had been served as much as it could be, but it still felt inadequate. I drove home and found Sophia and Marcus in the kitchen making dinner together, laughing about something, the house filled with warmth and the smell of garlic. This was my real life now, not the hearing or the parole board or Thomas's release. This was what mattered. "How did it go?" Sophia asked, her face serious. "They granted parole. He'll be out in 2 weeks. She nodded slowly. "How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, I don't feel much of anything. He served his time according to the law. Now he gets to try to rebuild his life, and we get to continue building ours. Those two things don't have to intersect." "Good," Sophia said firmly, "because I'm not interested in intersecting with him." Marcus squeezed my shoulder supportively. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. Why don't you go change into something comfortable and try to relax?" I did, shedding the professional clothes I'd worn to the hearing and putting on soft pajamas, even though it was only 6 in the evening. When I came back to the kitchen, Marcus handed me a glass of wine, and Sophia had set the table. And for a while, we just existed as a family, talking about Sophia's upcoming basketball tournament and Marcus's plans for summer break from teaching. Thomas was released on a Tuesday. I only knew because my lawyer called to confirm he'd been processed out and the parole conditions were active. I thanked her for the update and went about my day, picking up dry cleaning, going to work, helping Sophia study for finals. His release didn't change anything in my daily life, and I was determined to keep it that way. But about a month later, something unexpected happened. I was at Sophia's basketball game, cheering from the bleachers with Marcus and a group of other parents, when I saw a familiar figure standing at the back of the gym. Thomas, wearing civilian clothes, a baseball cap pulled low, watching from a distance. My first instinct was anger. He wasn't supposed to have contact with us. But then I realized he was staying far back, not approaching, not making his presence known to Sophia. Just watching his daughter play basketball from the shadows. Part of me wanted to call security, to have him removed for violating the spirit, if not the letter of his parole conditions. But another part of me saw the expression on his face, the mixture of pride and profound sadness, and I felt something unexpected, pity. He'd destroyed his own life, and now all he could do was watch from the margins as his daughter lived hers without him. I didn't acknowledge him or point him out to Sophia. After the game, which Sophia's team won handily, I looked back to where he'd been standing and he was gone. He didn't try to approach us in the parking lot or follow us home. He'd simply watched his daughter play basketball and then disappeared back into whatever life he was building. It happened twice more over the next few months. Always at public games, always at a distance, always disappearing before Sophia could spot him. I never mentioned it to her, seeing no reason to upset her or make her self-conscious during games. If Thomas wanted to torture himself by watching the life he'd sacrificed from afar, that was his choice. Then one day, nearly 6 years after the truth had first come out, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello? Angela, it's Thomas. Please don't hang up." I should have. I should have ended the call immediately and blocked the number. But curiosity kept me on the line. "You're not supposed to contact me." "I know. I'm violating parole by making this call, and if you report me, I'll go back to prison. I'm willing to take that risk because I need to tell you something, and I don't know if I'll get another chance." "What could you possibly need to tell me?" There was a long pause, filled with the sound of his breathing. "I'm sick, Angela. I have pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, probably less." The words hung in the air between us. I felt nothing. Then slowly, a complicated mixture of emotions began to surface. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it, sort of. "I wouldn't wish cancer on anyone, not even Thomas. I'm not calling to ask for sympathy or to try to reconcile. I'm calling because I wanted you to know that all the money I'm making at my job, I've been putting it aside for Sophia. I've set up a trust that will go to her when I die. It's not much, maybe $30,000 by the time everything is settled, but it's everything I have. I wanted you to know it's coming so you can help her deal with it however she needs to." "Thomas, I've also written her a letter," he continued, talking faster now as if afraid I'd hang up. "Several letters, actually. They're with my attorney to be given to her after I'm gone. I wanted to explain things, apologize properly, tell her about her grandparents and her family history, all the things I should have told her when I had the chance. You don't have to give them to her if you don't think she's ready. That's your call as her mother. But they exist, and they're honest, and they're hers if she wants them." I sat down on the couch processing this information. "How long have you known?" 2 months. I didn't want to tell you until I had everything arranged, until I knew for sure that Sophia would be taken care of financially. At least a little bit. I know 30,000 doesn't make up for what I stole or what I cost you, but it's something. "Why are you really calling, Thomas? What do you want from me?" Another long pause. Permission, I guess. Permission to have existed in her life, even if it was brief and even if I ruined everything. I want to know that someday, maybe, she might think of me as more than just the man who abandoned her. Maybe she'll read the letters and understand that I was broken and weak, but I did love her. I always loved her." "Love isn't enough," I said quietly. "Love without action, without sacrifice, without showing up, that's not really love at all. That's just a feeling, and feelings don't raise children or pay bills or heal wounds." "I know. You're right. I know that." His voice cracked. "I just wanted to hear you say that maybe someday there's a chance she might understand, even if she never forgives." I thought about Sophia, now 16 and thriving, strong and confident and so far beyond the pain Thomas had caused. I'll give her the letters when the time is right. I'll make sure she knows about the money, and I'll tell her that, despite everything, you thought about her at the end. But I can't promise she'll care, Thomas. I can't promise it will matter to her. She's built a good life without you, and she might choose to keep it that way." "That's more than I deserve," he said. "Thank you, Angela, for everything. For being the parent our daughter needed when I failed her. For being strong enough to uncover the truth and make sure there were consequences. For surviving what I did to you and building something beautiful from the rubble. You're an incredible woman, and I was a fool to throw away what we had." "Yes, you were," I agreed. There was no point in softening it. "Is there anything else?" "No, that's everything. I'll have my attorney send you the contact information for the trust and the letters. Take care of yourself, Angela. Take care of our girl." He hung up before I could respond. I sat holding the phone for a long time, staring at nothing, trying to process this new information. Thomas was dying. The man who'd faked his death was now actually dying. There was a cruel irony in that. When Sophia came home from school, I told her about the call. She listened without interruption, her face carefully neutral, a skill she'd developed over years of therapy and emotional processing. "So he's dying," she said when I finished. "Yes. And he left me money and letters." "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment. "Do you think I should see him before he dies?" The question caught me off guard. "Do you want to?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me thinks I should, because maybe I'll regret it if I don't. But another part of me thinks seeing him now, when he's sick and dying, would just be this manipulative emotional thing where I end up feeling sorry for him and forgiving him when he doesn't deserve it." "Those are both valid perspectives," I said carefully. "This is entirely your choice, Sophia. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But I want you to make the decision based on what you need, not on what you think you should do or what might make him feel better." She nodded slowly. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. Take all the time you need." She thought about it for 3 days, discussing it with Dr. Reeves, talking it through with Marcus even, calling her best friend for perspective. On the 3rd evening, she came to me with her decision. "I want to see him," she said, "but I want you there, and I want to do it on my terms, in a public place with a time limit. I want to be in control of the situation." "That's very wise," I said. "I'll arrange it." I contacted Thomas's attorney and set up a meeting at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop with outdoor seating, where Sophia would feel safe and could leave whenever she wanted. Thomas's attorney cautioned that Thomas was quite ill and might not be able to stay long, but he agreed to the terms. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. Sophia dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made her feel confident and strong. As we drove to the coffee shop, she was quiet, nervous energy radiating from her. "Remember," I said as we parked, "you don't owe him anything. Not forgiveness, not absolution, not comfort. You're doing this for you, to get whatever closure you need. His feelings are his responsibility, not yours." "I know," she said, but her hands were shaking slightly. We arrived early and chose a table in the outdoor seating area. Sophia sat facing the parking lot so she could see Thomas arrive. I sat beside her, close enough to offer support, but giving her space to lead the conversation. Thomas arrived right on time, escorted by a woman I assumed was his parole officer, required supervision for this meeting. He looked terrible, gaunt and pale, moving slowly like every step caused pain. But when he saw Sophia, his face transformed, lighting up with a mixture of joy and profound sadness. He approached the table carefully, giving Sophia time to object to his presence. When she didn't speak, he sat across from us, maintaining the distance she'd required. "Sophia," he said, his voice hoarse, "thank you for agreeing to see me. I know I don't deserve it." "No, you don't," Sophia said, her voice steady and strong. "But I needed to see you, for me. I needed to look at you and remember that you're just a person, not this giant source of pain in my life, just a flawed person who made terrible choices." Thomas nodded, accepting this. "That's exactly what I am. Flawed and weak and full of regret for choices I can never take back. Mom told me you're sick." "Yes, I have cancer. I don't have much time left." Sophia studied his face, taking in the evidence of his illness. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes. They give me medication for it." "Good," she said, and I heard the echo of the 13-year-old who'd thought his suffering was justified. But then her expression softened slightly. "I don't actually want you to suffer. I'm not that person. But I'm also not going to pretend I'm devastated that you're dying. You've been dead to me for most of my life anyway." The words were harsh but honest, and Thomas accepted them with a nod. "I understand. You have every right to feel that way." "I do," Sophia agreed. "But Dr. Reeves says I should tell you how I actually feel. All of it, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm angry that you left. I'm angry that you lied. I'm angry that you watched me from a distance instead of being brave enough to be a real father. But I'm also okay. I have a good life. I have a mom who actually shows up for me, a stepdad who treats me with respect, friends who care about me, and a future I'm excited about. You don't get any credit for that, but I wanted you to know that you didn't break me." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "I can see that. You're strong and smart and everything I hoped you'd be. Your mother did an amazing job raising you." "She did," Sophia agreed. "Because she had to do it alone, because you chose gambling and hiding over being a parent. So yeah, she did an amazing job despite you, not because of you." "You're absolutely right." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Sophia spoke again, her voice quieter now. I read one of your letters. Mom gave me the first one a while ago. You said you loved me. I do, I always have. But you don't know what love means, Sophia said, not cruelly, just matter-of-factly. Love is showing up. Love is sacrifice. Love is putting someone else's needs before your own comfort. You didn't do any of that. You just had feelings and called them love. But feelings without actions aren't worth anything. I felt proud of her in that moment, this 16-year-old girl who'd learned painful lessons about love and was articulating them with such clarity. Thomas nodded, tears running down his thin cheeks. You're right. I failed you in every way that mattered. I'm sorry, Sophia. I know it doesn't help. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am profoundly sorry for everything I did and everything I failed to do. Sophia looked at him for a long moment, and I saw her making some kind of internal decision. I don't forgive you, she said finally. I might never forgive you, but I accept your apology and I release you from my anger. Not for you, but for me. I don't want to carry anger about you around for the rest of my life, so I'm choosing to let it go. Thank you, Thomas whispered. That's more grace than I deserve. It is, Sophia agreed. She stood up, signaling the meeting was over. I hope your last months aren't too painful. I hope you find some kind of peace, but I won't be visiting again, and when you die, I probably won't come to your funeral. I needed to see you this once, to say what I needed to say, and now I'm done. Thomas stood as well, unsteady on his feet. I understand. Thank you for giving me this chance. I'll treasure this conversation for however long I have left. Sophia nodded once, then turned and walked toward the car. I stood to follow her but paused, looking at Thomas. She's a remarkable person, I said quietly. And she got that strength despite you, not because of you. I hope you think about that in whatever time you have left. I will, Thomas said. Every day. Angela, Don't, I interrupted. We're done, Thomas. We were done 5 years ago when the truth came out. This was for Sophia, not for you or me. Goodbye. I walked away without looking back, joining Sophia in the car. She sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, her jaw clenched. You okay? I asked gently. She nodded, then shook her head, then started crying. I held her while she sobbed, releasing years of complicated emotions. When she finally pulled away, wiping her eyes, she looked lighter somehow. That was really hard, she said. I know, baby, but you did it, and you did it on your own terms. I'm so proud of you. I meant what I said. I don't forgive him. But I feel better having said it to his face, having taken back some of the power he had over my emotions. That's incredibly mature, I said, starting the car. How about we go get ice cream and then watch terrible movies for the rest of the day? That sounds perfect. Thomas died 3 months later. His attorney called to inform us and to arrange the transfer of the trust fund and the delivery of the letters he'd written. Sophia decided not to attend the funeral, spending that day at a basketball tournament instead, choosing life and forward motion over death and the past. The letters sat in a box in her closet for 2 years. She finally read them when she was 18, accepted to her first-choice college on a basketball scholarship, secure enough in herself to handle whatever they contained. She never told me exactly what they said, just that they were honest and sad, and exactly what she'd expected. The money, $33,000 after everything was settled, went into an account for her future. She didn't spend it for years, almost like accepting it would mean accepting something from him. But eventually, she used it for graduate school, transforming his final gift into education and opportunity. And me? I married Marcus in a small ceremony with Sophia as my maid of honor. We built a life together based on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine partnership. I never forgot what Thomas had done, but I also never let it define me. The scars remained, but they were just part of my story, not the whole story. Sometimes people ask if I regret uncovering the truth, if ignorance might have been easier. The answer is always no. The truth, no matter how painful, gave me back my power. It allowed Sophia and me to heal from real wounds instead of false ones. It taught us both that we were stronger than we'd ever imagined, capable of surviving betrayal and building something beautiful from the ashes. Thomas had tried to steal our lives with his deception, but in the end, he only succeeded in stealing his own. We survived, we thrived, and that was the best revenge I could have ever asked for. Years later, when Sophia had children of her own, she told them about their grandfather who'd made terrible choices but whose story taught important lessons about integrity, honesty, and the real meaning of love. She spoke about him not with bitterness, but with the clear-eyed perspective of someone who'd processed deep pain and come through it whole. And sometimes, late at night, I'd think about that woman I'd been, climbing 6 flights of stairs with an envelope of money, dutiful and grief-stricken and blind to the truth. I barely recognized her now. She'd been transformed by truth and pain and determination into someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who would never again accept lies simply because they were easier than confrontation. The dead don't always stay dead, Mrs. Patterson had told me that day in the courtyard. She'd been right, though not in the way she'd meant. Thomas had been alive all along. But the person who'd actually died that day 5 years ago was me, the naive woman who trusted too easily and questioned too little. In her place rose someone new, someone forged in the fire of betrayal and cooled in the waters of justice. And that person, I realized, looking back over the years, was exactly who I'd needed to become.